Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt, and welcome to week 17 of the Language Learning Mastermind group. And if you're new here, this is basically a weekly series of videos where I talk about language learning, I talk about my own progress, and hopefully kind of all these things put together will help you to stay motivated, to have more fun, and make more progress. And I'll leave the timestamps for the different sections of this video in the description below. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I wanted to start off and talk about our challenge, or weekly challenge for the start of this video. And basically, this is kind of a section of the video where I think we can really push ourselves and try to get to the next level in our language learning or have more fun, right? Really kind of think of ways that we can push ourselves to get to that new level. And last week, I determined that this week, I wanted to really focus in on reading. And I'll talk about that more in the progress section of this video. It went really well, but basically my focus was on reading and really trying to get a ton out of it. And it really worked out for me. So I don't think you need to do a challenge where you mix things up dramatically every single week, but it might be worthwhile to think about it ever so often, right? Or to keep your challenge going for the next week or for a month, maybe even just longer than 1 week, right? Sometimes just a week of doing something different can be a good thing, or it can open you up to new ways of learning or kind of new methods. So I think it's very helpful, right? You just have to look at this kind of weekly challenge idea and apply it to kind of what makes sense for you, whether that's to continue the challenge into the next couple of weeks, just for 1 week to try something out, to try a different area, etc. And so for me, I'm going to not repeat the reading challenge that I did, but I'm going to focus in a lot more into reading, and I'll talk about that more in the progress section. So I would encourage you just to think about some things that you could do for a weekly challenge that would really push you to the next level, whether that's maybe 80% of your time is going to reading or to speaking or listening. Just try to do something a little bit different, right? Mix things up where you're focusing in a ton of time into vocabulary acquisition or reading or listening or whatever the activity is. Maybe it's to really start to push yourself to start playing video games in a foreign language or use Netflix or something like that. So pick something that's going to be a big challenge. Try to maybe do an hour of that activity every single day, whether it's you really want to start using compelling activity, practicing speaking every day, etc. And then kind of set that goal and just see what happens for the kind of what happens after that week is done, and you can kind of adjust accordingly. In addition, let me know how your language learning is going in the comment section below, but let me know in the language that you are learning. I think it's really great to try to practice your output in writing. I think a lot of people want to do that, but I would encourage you to do that. And if you're not open to leaving a comment, write it in a journal somewhere or in a text file and just practice that output. I think it can be very helpful. And if you're not at a very high skill level, just don't worry about the mistakes or anything like that. Just try to write a sentence. And if you can write a paragraph or longer, great. Or if you're more motivated to do so, awesome. But don't worry about the grammar or mistakes. Just try to do your best on that kind of output. Challenge yourself to really, tell me how your language learning went for the week, but in the language that you're learning. And in addition to that, just for something that might be a little bit different, if you don't want to tell me about how your week went in language learning, tell me about some things that you've read recently that are very interesting. Maybe it's a book or something about like one of your hobbies that you're interested in that you've read about. Let me know something that you've read recently and whether it was interesting or new or whatever it was, right? Just to kind of work on some different vocabulary in terms of your output. And so that's what I have for this kind of weekly challenge section. So once again, if you're open to it, leave a comment below, but in the language that you're learning, and try to set yourself up for a challenge that can really expand your language learning for the coming weeks. So now I wanted to transition and talk about my progress within language learning this week, and it went really well. It did not go according to plan. Things were really busy, but I did get a lot out of my weekly challenge that I set, and I think I made a lot of progress overall. So kind of last week, I made this kind of goal of trying to do 7 hours of reading in Russian. And I actually didn't get to that total. I got about 5 hours or so. But I did get to my 7 hour total when I kind of combined all of the different areas. Didn't really focus too much on vocabulary acquisition outside of reading, but I got a lot out of reading. And so overall, I thought it was a really great week. I did not hit my reading goal, which is kind of a little disappointing, but I hit my overall goal, which is good. But that being said, even though I missed my reading goal, it was just to challenge myself to read more and to get more out of reading. And so, in a way, I think that I got a lot out of this week despite not hitting that 7 hour total, right? It's the principle that's important, not the specific hour total in of itself. So, things get busy at times and it's okay. Now, that being said, I wanted to kind of talk about that progress. And so, really, the kind of the big area that I focused in on was reading, and it was really a lot of fun, and I got a lot out of it. I really felt like I picked up a lot of words from really focusing in on reading. I really noticed a ton of grammar, and I think I got better at grammar, and I really enjoyed my time with reading. And one of the things that kind of definitely happened was there was times where the reading material was manageable, it wasn't too difficult, and then there was times where it was very challenging. I did not know a ton of the words that were kind of being thrown at me. And so I think that this is just an important thing to realize when you're dealing with compelling content, is that sometimes the content that you're using, whether it's video games, reading, listening, or whatever, is going to be very challenging, and other times it's very manageable. And that's what I definitely experienced this week. And it was definitely hard to keep going, and when I was really facing very difficult, challenging material. But the kind of the way I offset it was, I would try to read for 15 or 30 minutes here and there, and then when I kind of felt myself getting tired or losing concentration, I would stop, right? Because now I'm reaching this point of diminishing returns. So, obviously, if I was dealing with more manageable material, I could go for longer. So I tried to really be really efficient with the time that I was reading, right? Really put in quality time such that, I wasn't distracted or unmotivated or whatever it is. I think that really made the kind of time that I put into reading a lot more quality than just kind of trying to get to a number, a 7 hour number, just for the sake of the number itself. So overall, like I said, some of it was very manageable, and other times it was very difficult. And I learned a lot of words. And the thing about it too is that there are a lot of cases too where I saw the same words. You look them up and you just don't remember them. And that was the case for me too, where I looked up a bunch of words over and over again, and it's still really not in my long-term memory. But there's other cases where I did look up words, and I kind of have those words in my brain now. It's I have that knowledge. So it's just kind of a process, right? It's just a lot of it is just about repetition and exposure to these words and these grammar concepts again and again. I think that the second thing that I noticed was this grammar kind of acquisition that I really got out of it. I really saw a lot of the cases in action, whether it was the dative, the instrumental, or whatever it is, and I really felt a lot more comfortable with it overall. So, I think that was really great. I saw a lot of conjugations in action, whether it was the past tense, the future, or the present, which I felt a lot more comfortable with. I think the biggest thing that I noticed, though, is that there's a lot of kind of ending changes with nouns and stuff when you have different cases. And when I read, you can obviously kind of pick some of the words out, even if you don't know all of the endings for all the cases for nouns or what have you. And so when you're reading, you can kind of infer the meaning of words, even though they have this kind of different ending to it, which was great, and that's fine. But it's kind of one of those things where you also realize that if we're talking about speaking, this is going to be way more difficult because I have to remember those endings and then kind of try to express myself as accurately as possible. Right now, obviously, it's probably okay if you give the wrong endings ever so often, but it's just kind of one of those things that I noticed where I was able to do okay not knowing all the grammar while I was reading, right? That was totally fine. But I did clearly see that this could be a challenge when I'm practicing speaking later on. And I think that this is kind of a big lesson that you can kind of look at where you can be really good at input-based activities and reading and things like that, but to get to that place where you're really comfortable with speaking and output can be a lot more challenging just given that kind of dynamic that I just described. But overall, I was really happy with kind of the grammar that I noticed within the reading, and picking it up and getting more comfortable with it, as well as the vocabulary in of itself. And I had a lot of fun doing it. So I'm going to definitely continue doing reading a lot more in the coming weeks. I'm going to maybe not necessarily go for 7 hours every single week with reading, but I'm going to make it a lot more of a focus because I definitely saw a lot of benefits from that over this week. And then in addition to that, I did some listening. That's kind of very similar to what I've been experiencing last week. I'm noticing words and grammar here and there, but in a lot of times it's very difficult just with the pace of the audio content or the words that are used or grammar or things like that. But not too much in terms of updates on listening. I didn't really focus in on too many of the other areas. Like I said, it was kind of connected to my weekly challenge for the week. But overall, I feel very good about my Russian progress. It wasn't perfect because I really wish I would have gotten to my 7 hour total for reading. But overall, I think that the challenge this week was very successful, and I'm really happy with the results overall. This week, I wanted to talk about obstacles in language learning. And I think this is a very critical topic because, often really, I think that many of the obstacles that people face really kind of come down to one of two areas. It's not having fun in your language learning and the feeling that you're not making, progress. You're not getting the results that you would like. And this is a tough one, primarily because learning a language takes so long, right? It takes a long time to reach fluency or a high skill level. And I think that even if you're doing all the right things, you're likely to face kind of both of these kind of aspects: the feeling of not making progress and not having fun. And especially if you're not really used to learning a language, maybe this is the first time you've ever tried to do language learning, you're really new to how to approach things. I think these kind of ideas hit you way harder versus having learned a language before or something like that. And it's really tough because at the beginning stages, you don't have a lot of flexibility, right? You don't have a high skill level. You don't know that many words, the grammar, and things like that. And so you're kind of forced to have to grind through a lot of this kind of early stage stuff. And at first, there's novelty behind it, right? There's some newness, but I do think that a lot of times it really does wear off. And in cases like that, like, a lot of people end up quitting, right? A lot of people give up because they get bored or there's just so much more to go, or they're not getting the results they want. And I think it's evident because if you look at the vast majority of people, they kind of quit at that beginner stage. I don't know what everyone else's experience has been, but in a lot of cases, it's very rare, at least in my own experience, to see people that have learned a language on their own and get to that intermediate, or advanced stage with things. And I think that goes to show a lot of the kind of struggle with the kind of feeling of not making progress and not having fun, right? And obviously, if you're really involved within language learning, um, or polyglots or something like that, right? You kind of have this survivorship bias a little bit because you see a bunch of polyglots doing this over and over again, or a lot of people that are really into language learning doing this, and so you kind of have this perspective that maybe you don't see that failure of all these people quitting. And so when I kind of try to talk about these ideas, I want to try to hit all of the, try to make it relevant for everybody, because I do think that these are probably the two biggest obstacles that you face. And you face them, even outside of being a beginner, right? Where, something works and then it doesn't work anymore. Like your vocabulary acquisition just stagnates, or, how you've been approaching reading, you just get really burdened by the reading material that you're using or the listening and audio content. And you have to mix things up. You don't have to do these things, but I think it's worthwhile to mix things up and to always be kind of thinking on your feet about what to do next. And that's why I stress a lot of this in my videos. And I know that I'm repeating myself a lot with some of these concepts, but I think that it's important to repeat these ideas because I think they're very important, right? Where there are instances where you're doing an activity and it works and it doesn't work anymore. It's not fun. It's you're bored. You're grinded down, and it could be like a beginner app. I think that happens a lot. It's kind of a relatable experience, but it can also happen when you're maybe reading a fiction book and you're halfway through it and you're really just grinded down by how hard it is, or certain audio content or video games or whatever it is. And I think that's why it's important to always be reflecting, because when you're reflecting, you're able to identify when things are going right and when things are going wrong, when you're losing motivation, or this isn't effective anymore. Because that power of thinking for yourself, and trusting yourself is the most powerful tool that you have, right? You can figure out when things are going wrong and then try to tackle it with a solution. And no program or app, or even just like YouTuber, right, including me, is going to be able to solve that for you. And so you want to trust in yourself to be able to identify those problems and to solve them, solve those obstacles. And when it comes to having fun in language learning, I think a lot of times it's about mixing things up, and it's about doing the things that you want to do and going after them and trying to enjoy them, right? And you're going to have to mix them up and adjust when it's too difficult, or change the way that you do things. And then in terms of those feelings of not feeling like you're making progress, I think it comes down to identifying what you need to work on and really coming up with a game plan, a schedule on hitting those areas such that you feel like you're making progress again and you're getting um, more efficiency out of your language learning, etc. So when you talk about our obstacles, right? Obviously, there's a lot of clear cut strategies that you can do, right? Focusing on vocabulary acquisition, get the most common words in the language, practice listening every day, and kind of your and try to multitask, or work on speaking, right? All these things we can talk about. But ultimately, I think the core fundamental here is thinking for yourself and being able to identify the problems and tackling with solutions, right? This critical thinking aspect, and it seems obvious, it seems intuitive, but I think sometimes we just forget about it, right? Sometimes you could be just so focused in on language learning, and you just know that you're bored with something, or you're not being efficient. And if you just took a step back and try to separate the ego and all those things, um, you can make your language learning more efficient, solve the problems, have more fun with it. So this is obviously an idea that I think goes beyond language learning, right? It's a incredibly powerful skill to have in life in general. And I'm not an expert at it by any means, but I do think that I try to implement it as best as I can. And I think that you should too if you're not already, right? Think for yourself and try to problem solve, right? Try to identify the problems and tackle them with solutions, which is what I try to just reinforce in the reflection sections of these videos every week, right? And I think a lot of times those obstacles kind of come down to those two areas that I just talked about, right? The feeling of not having progress and not having fun. And if you, I think, kind of try to balance both those ideas, generally speaking, that I think that deals with most of the obstacles that you'll face with language learning, in my opinion at least, and in my own personal experience. So when we're talking about obstacles, and I know that this is in a lot of ways repetition of a lot of the kind of concepts that I've talked about over and over again, think for yourself and try to come up with a solution to those problems. Really identify them, dig deep, and come up with a solution and go after them, right? Because that constant vigilance and observation and reflection is going to help you to get over these obstacles in the end of the day. And now I wanted to transition into our weekly reflection and ask you, how did your week go in language learning? What are three things that went really well and three things that did not go so well? And I know that at times, if you've been watching these kind of series of videos, this might seem really repetitive, but I do have to kind of reinforce these ideas because I think it's really important. And it's really, I think, very beneficial to just kind of always ask yourself, how is your week going in language learning? What are you doing right and what are you doing wrong? Just such that you can find those things that maybe are not so great, you're not having fun, they're inefficient. You kind of see this problem that's getting bigger and bigger, and you can try to solve it and come up with a solution, right? And by doing that, you can make your language learning more efficient. You can get faster results and ultimately also have more fun, especially if you kind of realize that the activities that you're doing are grinding you down, etc. And I think that it's also important to pat yourself on the back, right? And look at the things that you're doing great to help you to just stay motivated and to keep you excited about the language that you're learning. So, what are three things that went really well for you this week? So, for example, for me, as I talked about, I'm really happy about the reading progress that I've had with Russian. The weekly challenge that I did went really well, and I'm also really happy with the listening progress that I'm making and the vocabulary acquisition in general. So it's going really well. And three things that maybe did not go so well is I know I can do a lot better with grammar. I know that grammar is going to gradually come, but I do want to focus in on it a little bit more and I can be a little bit better at it. I think that I can also fit in some more time into language learning. It's just been very busy, and I know that I can do better at that. So, what are just some things, and it doesn't have to be three things, that you're doing right, and what are three things you're doing wrong? And if you're having trouble with it, try to focus in on the core areas of language learning, whether it's reading, um, vocabulary acquisition, listening, speaking, things like that, and try to just think about what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, and don't just identify those problems. Try to tackle it with a solution, right? Try to come up with a way that you're going to make it better or have more fun, or just try things out, right? Try something out for tomorrow or the next day and see if it works and try to stick with it because you might find some different ways to approach things or find out some different ways to have fun. And it might be really helpful for your language learning over the long term. So I think that it's important to reflect ever so often in your language learning, whether it's every week or every month, just to make sure that you're on the right path and that your goals are aligned, and that, just trying to identify some areas where you can improve just to make your language learning better overall. And that's what I have for the week. So let me know what you think. If you're open to it, leave a comment below and let me know how your language learning is going, but in the language that you're learning. And if you're not open to it, still consider writing that down, but in a text file or in a notebook, and try to set up a weekly challenge for yourself to push you to the next level within your language learning. With all that being said, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.